Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started here in a few minutes.
Hey there, Sydney. Sorry I'm hopping on a bit late.
No, no problem. I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen and video now.
Awesome. I'm at my sister's home in Portland, and I have been trying to work in this area, but the Wi-Fi keeps going out unexpectedly today, and so I've tried to kind of relocate to a place in her yard. So hopefully we don't have too big
Okay.
of a problem. But if it drops off, I'll try going inside and finding a little bit stronger connection.
Perfect. Sounds good. Maybe we'll give people like one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, well, it's 2:02. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. We always do a little bit of an intro. So we'll give more people time to hop on. But thank you guys for joining us today. We're excited to be offering another webinar with Stewards Unlimited. Hopefully, these give you guys some good guidance as to filling out these grant applications. So before we get started, we always like to do a little bit of promotion for this webinar series. We may have seen some of you on Tuesday at our local SEO webinar. And then obviously today's event, and then we'll have 3 more webinars throughout the fall, one each month. So if you're interested in any of the following events, holiday gift boxes, considering e-commerce or using Canva, we'd be excited to have you. We always like to talk a little bit about Chop Local as well. So Chop Local is an online marketplace for farmers and butcher shops to sell meat direct to consumer. So if you're looking for an e-commerce platform to be able to sell your products, we would be happy to talk to you about what it's like to be a vendor on Chop Local. So with that, I'm gonna let Stephen take over. The Q&A feature is enabled today, so if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to answer those, and we'll probably get to those closer to the end. But with that, I will pass things over to Stephen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sydney. Um, and yeah, thank you for hosting this webinar. It's a great opportunity to share a little bit more about the current MPEP opportunity. It's really exciting, and so it's always great hearing from the people that I'm able to work with about the wonderful work that Chop Local does as well. So thank you again for hosting this as a free resource for all of them. That's pretty cool. I am going to share my screen. Are you able to see this? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So just basic overview. Today we're going to be talking about the Meat and Poultry Production Expansion Program, the MPEP. This is the second round of the MPEP. The first one came out about a year ago. As a disclaimer, we're going to make the presentation slides available after the presentation. I think Sydney will probably send them out to everybody who participates. And so feel free to listen and brainstorm rather than worrying about writing down all the details. I'll give some dates, some dollar amounts, some figures. Don't worry about getting all of those specifics written down because you will have access to this. We also have a list of different funding opportunities that we'll include with that will be shared at the end. And so there will be like more resources that you'll have access to. So really try to consider how this information might apply to your own business. And as always, the best advice is going to be tailored based on your individual needs and your individual business through conversation. So happy to take questions at the end and try to tailor it to you. But there may be some generalized statements that will need to be a little bit further tailored. So as an outline of what we're going to be covering today, we're going to talk about why this funding is important. We'll have an overview of what the actual program is and the different application types. We'll give you some tips about how to start working on your application today, and then ideas about how that could be leveraged in the future. And then I'll give you a little bit of an overview about my business as well. So I think that having this processing capacity increases resilience, economic growth, and community. I really like Wendell Berry, so oftentimes I'll quote some of his stuff that anybody interested in solving rather than profiting from the problems of food production and distribution will see that in the long run, the safest food supply is a local food supply, not a supply that is dependent on a global economy. And so a lot of the work that we do is actually with producers as well. And so all the people that we work with have problems with securing consistent processing capacity. And so it really is a group effort. It's it's not just a standalone business. It's part of an interconnected web, and it's always really a great experience to be able to work with processors to help the individual producers, because you can see not only helps the processing business, but each of the producers also benefits pretty substantially from that. So as a broad overview, the MPEP is a great opportunity to improve your processing business. The primary goal is providing new, better, and more processing options to meat and poultry producers in your market. There's 123 million available. And on this one, it ranges from the minimum grant award is actually 250K, and they range all the way up to 10 million, depending on what type of project you apply for. As far as anything official is said, this is not intended to be repeated funding. And so the round 2 of the MPEP was the last one that there was supposed to be. And so that's worth knowing. The applications are going to be due November 22nd at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. It's the same regardless of what time zone you're in. So it'd be a little bit earlier in the day if you are on Pacific time. It's highly recommended, though, that you're not submitting it the same day that it is due. So don't wait until November 22nd. You can resubmit applications. And so many times it's better for you to, even if you're still trying to polish things off and work on it, you can submit it a couple days before with the intention to resubmit at a later date as well. But then you're not taking as big of a risk if, for whatever reason, your internet goes down, or there's not as something happens with grants.gov and you're not able to submit on time. And so I'd highly recommend doing that. It's anticipated that the award date and when it would be starting is in April, late April in 2024, and then it can last up to 48 months. They do say, though, that the length of the project should depend on the complexity. And so if you're doing something really simple, it doesn't have to be 48 months, but you can use that full time in order to reach that upper end of the total budget available. They have a lot of stated goals for the MPEP. Primarily, it's for market and like increased capacity, right? They want to see the total volume be able to increase. And basically the 3 ways that they show are to accommodate more producers. And so will a project that you propose allow you to work with more producers? Will it allow you to process additional species? So not just doing beef, but expanding into pork as well. And then will it also increase overall volume of processing? And so I would say that you really want to hit two of these goals, ideally three, but obviously doing an additional species is a very unique project, so that may not be realistic for everybody. But increasing the overall volume, everybody should really be doing that with an application. And then ideally, you're also able to accommodate more producers and show concretely that your increased capacity would impact more people, not just doing more volume for the same people. That's still good. There's still a benefit to it, but there's a big push for underserved communities and people who don't currently have access. Some of the other key goals are they want to promote competition. And so if you can show that you're going into a market where there are very few options and therefore producers are getting high prices because there's just limited option, and you can bring competition in and be able to make it a more fair price for the producer, that is highly competitive. They also talk about resilient food and agricultural supply chains. And so the idea of if everybody is limited to two processors in your area and one of them goes out of business, then a lot of the producers will also potentially go out of business because they just don't have any options for how to continue processing their animals. So competition and resiliency. I'm a big fan of using the same vocabulary that grants use in my applications. And so this is always the first step that I'll go through. The same presentation is I'll go through the RFA and I try to pick out the keywords that they use as their goals. And then I focus and I say, specifically, how can I address competition? And I try to write out a paragraph about how we're increasing competition. And then I use that sometimes as a standalone. Sometimes I'll break it up and be able to integrate it into the rest of the application. But specifically trying to use those words and starting with what their key goals are as you start your application is really a big benefit to your competitiveness. Another goal is that they want to provide more processing capacity. And they give those same three goals, right? So the primary goal is increased capacity, and it's through those three things. So I would start out and I'd say, are we doing different species? Are we increasing the overall volume? And are we reaching new agricultural producers? As far as possible, grant reviewers love quantitative numbers. And so even if it's a guesstimate, I would try to guess what your overall increase in volume will be. And it's okay to say that this is not true, right? It's nothing set in stone, or the number of producers that you will be able to increase service to. And so as much as possible, trying to actually give numbers for those things is really important. Another key goal that I don't think was in the last one was providing meat and poultry processing for human consumption. And so a lot of processors, this is not a requirement for eligibility, but it is a goal. So it's not, if you're a pet food manufacturer, I think you're still eligible for an application, but these 3 bullet points come from the scoring criteria. So when somebody is evaluating how many points to give your proposal, they'll be looking at these 3 bullet points. And so one of the 3 is human consumption. And so it's worth considering how you will be impacting meat and poultry that's available for humans as well. Additional stated strategies are to support for more processing capacity. And it says all these things, but for the ultimate goal of elevating producer incomes. And so again, it ties back into how is your project impacting producers? And you can say that maybe if they are able to process more, therefore they're able to sell more, and that increases their revenue, increases their income. If you do a fee for service, perhaps they're able to process a larger percentage of their herd as products that they could then sell as direct to consumer, right? Through something like Shop Local. And so that is an argument about how you're elevating producer incomes by increasing your capacity. They talk about fair wages, and they want to keep profits circulating in the rural community. And so this focuses a lot on, if you're increasing your capacity, are you also increasing your workforce? USDA really prioritizes job creation, being able to maintain jobs. And so this is a key point of saying, how much more are we able to plug into our local economy in a rural area? They want to diversify the people who are receiving grants, including underserved communities. And so whether or not you are physically located in it, if you are sourcing, if you're working with producers who are in underserved communities, or if you're selling products into underserved communities, either side of the equation, you can highlight that and show how it's impacting them. And then obviously they want something that's technically feasible, financially viable, and have already identified other sources of funding. So as I mentioned earlier, the minimum is $250,000 for a grant, and that can only be 30% of the total, which we'll go into a little bit later. But that means that anyone who wants to apply for this grant has to, at minimum, provide over $500,000 of their own funding, whether that's through yourself, through another, a loan program, or other funding opportunities. You need to have already identified and kind of have an idea for how you're going to fund the rest of the project. And so that is another big feasibility question. As far as eligibility goes, they're pretty open to most organization types, which is nice. You can be a for-profit, nonprofit, government entity, tribes. It seems pretty open, and so most people are going to be able to apply. You do have to be either currently or planning to engage in expanding the processing capacity through slaughter or slaughter and further processing. And so this is something that's unique compared to the first round of the MPEP and the local, like the MCAP, which were two other funding opportunities over the last year, that you do have to have a slaughter facility for this grant. And so if you can have grant funding go towards like further processing, but it has to be further processing of animals that you also slaughtered in your facility, right? And so realistically, even if you do a slaughter, you're going to be probably more competitive if at least part of the grant is focused on increasing your slaughtering capacity, in addition to any further processing on top of that. It's also worth noting that applicants can only receive either the local MCAP or the MPEP, but they can't receive both. And so most people have not heard back about the local MCAP. It will be a while. And so it is a bit of a question of which one would be better. Obviously, this one is a little bit more for a lot of people. And so you can apply for this. And then if you were to be awarded both, you would have to choose which one you would rather receive. The MPEP does have two types of applications. They have full applications, wide range of activities to increase and diversify processing capacity. You can equip and purchase, you can build buildings, you can upgrade your facility, finance land. There are a lot of different ways that the funding can be used, and it's the most flexible. Grants range from $250,000 to $10 million. Again, that would be a 70% match from the applicant. So if you had 10 million, it was a mistake to try to do math on live, but what is that, like 21 million you'd have to provide of your own if you were to apply for the 10 million. You can also do an equipment only application. Granted, that is the minimum for that is 5 million. So the local MCAP had a much smaller equipment only simplified application, and that you were able to apply for a smaller amount. And so now they've really reduced it, and you'd have to apply for at least 5 million at the same cost share. So you'd still have to provide the 70% match for that program, which means it would be, what is that? Like a little over 10, I think, of your own. For application development, usually you need to have a discussion about the impacts to producers, to consumers, and to other relevant markets. And so just as an idea for when you're writing this all out, I oftentimes will just make a header that says impacts to producers. And that will be an entire header all on its own. And I'll write that out and flesh it out as much as I can. It's better to have a header and then have not as much information than to not address it. If you think that really your biggest impact is to producers but not to consumers, it's better to try to have something and specifically say why you think this isn't a major focus for your project or why it's not a concern than it is to not have it. Many times when people are reviewing these, they're going to be looking at a checklist, at a grading rubric, and it'll ask, did they talk about impacts to producers? Did they talk about impacts to consumers? And so matching them, being able to match, did they do this with a header, and then seeing that you at least said something can go a long way towards the review process. You also need to clearly outline the procurement of animals. And so this shouldn't be too big of a problem for most processors because there's so much demand. But if you're talking about increasing your capacity, you need to show how you're going to make sure that there is enough demand for those animals, how you're going to procure them, and what volume, what species, where the animals are coming from. There needs to be a general plan for that. And you also need to demonstrate fair pricing, regardless of which sourcing strategy you use. And so they specifically mention that you can purchase, you can buy animals directly from producers that you process and then sell as your own products. You can self-produce. So if you have a ranch and you're a processor, you can do that. If you are a processor that's fee for service, so producers are able to just hire you to process their animals for them and then return the cuts. There are a lot of different models that you're able to use, but you need to show how it's fair pricing, regardless of which one you're using. You need to show how the producer is receiving that increased income, like we mentioned earlier. You also need to provide letters of support from state or local leadership. Almost always, you want letters that are not just like, I support this project and are rubber stamped. You want somebody to say specifically what your project is, how it ties into needs in the local area, and what the impact will be. Many times I will write these out, right? So asking somebody to write a letter for you is oftentimes a pretty heavy lift. And so most of our clients, we will draft out what we want them to say, and we send it to them and we ask them to put it on their letterhead, of course, to read through it and to approve it. But it really directs, and you can put in a lot of the gaps that might be in your grant application. You can cover them through letters of support. So if you're trying to validate the market opportunity, but you can't validate it through online research, and you can't prove that there are a lot of producers that need more processing capacity, you could say it in your application, but it's much stronger if you can reach out to a local organization that represents ranchers in your area, and you can get them to sign a letter that says, we can see within our members that there's this lack and that there would be a large impact to increasing the capacity. So feasibility studies, this is a fortunate thing about this one is that last MPEP, you had to have a feasibility study. And with the 30-day window that they had for the application, most people were not able to prepare them in time. This one, it's not required unless you've been in operation for less than a year, if you're building a new facility outside of your current market, if you're processing a new species, or if you're establishing a new product line. Then you do have to have a feasibility study. Regardless of that, all applications are required to have a business plan. And most of the time, they're going to be 90% the same, right? They have many times the same target market, demographic information, very similar processes. A lot of it is going to be the same. So I want to give some tips about how to start working on your application today. In our process, normally we start out always making sure that people are registered on sam.gov. You have a UEI number, you're registered on grants.gov. We'll go through and gather everything that they've already worked on. If they already have a business plan, if they have previous grant applications, getting everything together as just one big resource to draw from. From there, we develop a big picture view of the project scope and work budget. And that's what we can kind of talk through what you might be able to start on today. And then figuring out who's going to be engaged, what letters you need, kind of like all of the things that are external. Usually other people aren't as motivated as you are to get a grant in. And so if you want them to provide a letter for your project, or if you want them to give you budget numbers or quotes for things, you need to engage them fairly early on. And so that's always a priority early. Then actually, strangely enough, near the end is when I actually write the narrative. So the narrative is oftentimes the last thing that I do, because many times you already know in your head, right? You know that there's demand and you know kind of where you can get the proof of it. And so you don't need to spend all the time writing it out perfectly at the beginning. It's more important to have a budget and to understand what you want to use the money on before you do the narrative. And then at the very end, you can finalize the paperwork, you put it into the template, you know, submit it. So for a simple scope of work, usually most people have an intuitive idea of what kind of improvements, right? Your biggest bottleneck is your smoker, and you just have been needing to replace your smoker or get another one for the last 10 years, but it's a big expense and you just haven't wanted to pull the trigger. You probably know, you know, what your bottleneck is. And so just start writing some of that down. I would say write down what those investments are. Do you need new equipment? Do you need a bigger facility? And what would go into that facility? You know, what do you need in order to actually achieve that? Do you need somebody to come and construct it? Would you do it yourself? Do you need to upgrade any of your food safety planning, permitting? Like, what are all the steps that you're going to be having to do? And then begin getting quotes for either the equipment or the services in order to start to outline it. You're going to know these things better than anybody from outside of your business. And so even if you don't have the perfect words to say, getting it down so that it's easy for you to communicate it to another person is always going to be the first step. It's usually trimmed down when you do your application, but you can't have too much written down in my opinion. This is also the biggest area that causes problems in my process, where sometimes when we've started out and we've said, okay, well, we'll finalize the budget, you know, later. There are almost always are changes that happen right at the end, and then the narrative changes as a result of that. And so you always want to start with a scope of work and a budget, because otherwise you'll end up redoing a lot of your work later on. Other big ideas that you want to be writing down are related to the strategies of the grant, right? So how do you fit into local meat processing capacity? How can you prove that there isn't enough capacity? How can you prove that there's a market? Either you can do that through third-party research, you can Google it, maybe you'll find some good information there. You can also prove it through letters of support from reputable organizations or directly from producers. What is your current operational efficiency? So how much are you currently processing? What are your margins? How many staff do you have? What's your total capacity? Just understanding where you are in order to then say, what are the biggest barriers and what is the impact of a project and what could you be? So being able to show kind of like this big picture growth that could be kickstarted by a project, and showing that there are longer term benefits to people like employees or producers, and your community as well. So how often are you engaging with people in your community? Jobs is always a really big one. Are you able to increase the funding that's being pumped back into those rural communities like we discussed previously? For the letters of support, I already touched on this a bit, but the three primary people that I'll try to get them from: producers, right? If you can get letters, I mean, as many, you can't have too many, but like getting letters from producers just saying, hey, I could process 50 head a year. I could process 100 head a year if there was the capacity here for me to engage with them. Right now I'm driving, 8 hours out of state in order to get it processed. Letters like that will be really influential. You also want to get letters from customers or next level processing that show that if they are processing these animals, is there a market for it, right? So you're showing that both there's the demand for the service and then there's the market for it. Third-party entities like extension agents, development councils, other processors can provide support. So a lot of times, if you can't get them from many individual producers, like I said earlier, a third-party entity might be like a cooperative of ranchers that you could get, or somebody who works with several different ones that could vouch for what you're saying. And then obviously you have to have them also from some local government and authorities as well, that just say this is aligned with our general development strategy, and we're excited to see this project thrive. As I mentioned earlier, usually I'll speak informally with people, kind of get an idea for what their thoughts are. I take notes. I will draft up a letter based on what their thoughts are, add in the things that I need to support from the narrative, and then I send it to them and ask them to just put on their letterhead and sign it, at least 2 weeks ahead of time. Otherwise, it'll oftentimes not get done. I will say that you need to register today. Every webinar you go to, they really hammer this home. So get registered on sam.gov. Put sam.gov into your URL. If you Google it, there are a lot of paid services, which are fine. You can pay for somebody to help you out with it, but that is not necessary. It is a free registration. And so just make sure that you can get your UEI. There are 2 different stages. You first get a UEI number, and then you register for financial aid. The Flower Hill Institute just did a great webinar that like walked you through the process. There's a recording and the slides that I can make sure get sent out with the follow-up for this webinar as well. Walk you through it. There are a lot of people who I think like the Flower Hill Institute that will actually help walk you through it, maybe even on a call. We also have like just write-ups, slides that can walk you through how to do it as well. Definitely begin the process now. It can be troublesome. And so just do it now. You'll thank yourself down the line. Same with grants.gov. You can Google this one. It's a lot easier. You have to have your UEI number first. So do the sam.gov process first. And then similarly, I think there are some free technical assistance providers who are willing to walk you through it. Or we also have, just walkthroughs that are on paper that we are happy to share with you as well. Registering also for technical assistance. So there's a number of free services available to help your business, both in preparation for this grant, but also just for meat processors in general, that will help you with, doing the design for your facilities, doing business planning, market analysis. Like there's a lot of wraparound services. And so the MPPTA program is specifically funded through USDA in order to provide assistance like that. And here are some links to various people who are in the MPPTA. I really like the Flower Hill Institute. They also do great. They've had 2 webinars for the MPEP over the last 2 weeks. And they really know their stuff. And so they'll also have calls with you. You can sign up for free technical assistance. And it's a really valuable service you should check out. Even if you don't get an application in, please still go through this planning process, right? Like you've just heard about it. You have until November, so there is a fair amount of time to pull it together an application, but it also is overwhelming. And so it can feel like a lot. Even though it's overwhelming, it's worth going through this process. Competition is high. People have been kind of aware that this was coming ever since last year. The local MCAP had over 800 applications just like 2 months ago. And as it's gone, I've had a lot of people reach out to me and they're like, I kind of didn't believe in grants, but then, the MPEP was awarded and I saw somebody who got it. And I was like, man, if they can get it, like I should be getting it. Right. And so there's a lot of people like that, and awareness is really spread for these grant programs. And so competition will be high, just a part of it, but that shouldn't discourage you from applying. You have a lot of time to pull together your resources and to start planning. Grants really are just one piece of a larger funding strategies. Almost always, they need you to have a match. They need you to have the infrastructure in order to implement the grant. They want to see that it's increasing your capacity and having a really grand impact long term, rather than, I think a lot of people see grants as it's a sinking ship. They need a subsidy to like not fail as a business, but that's really not what these programs are focused on. And so therefore you need to have a long-term vision for how this inflush of funding is going to build your capacity. And again, one of the biggest goals of the grant is actually to leverage additional capital. And so they want to see that not just them giving you money, they want to see other people recognizing the value in what you're doing and investing capital in it. There is a difference between the business plan and feasibility studies. Business plans generally wide overview of the market, products, and operations. Feasibility studies oftentimes are narrowed down. It's a specific product, it's a specific like project, like a grant project, or it's an initiative. Most smaller operations, though, if you have a small processor and you're really just processing one animal and you do the same basic cuts, you're doing the same basic value addition, a feasibility study is going to be 90% the same as your business plan. And so what I've seen is that the people who have a strong business plan in place are able to quickly update and have somebody sign off and be able to qualify it as a feasibility study without it having a big price tag attached to it. These planning reduce the upfront cost. So if you have that business plan, it really makes it easy to pull together a competitive grant. Technical service providers have lots of people reach out when a grant like this is released, but they're always going to prioritize and be able to more effectively help those who have been engaged a longer term, right? So I know that I personally get lots of calls whenever one of these are announced, and especially like the month it's due, more and more people will start to call. But if that's a brand new relationship and you don't know their business and they're starting out without a lot of resources, it's a lot harder to work with a person compared to somebody that I've been working with over the summer, right? Or I've been working with over a year and I know their business well. And this is true across any kind of technical service provider. And I can only imagine the ones that offer a free service are very much that way too, where there's a lot of people when there's an opportunity, but then as soon as it's done, people kind of forget about it and they stop working on their business planning. If the people who started this process when the last MPEP came out and they said, all right, we know another one's coming out in a year, I want to prepare now, get my ducks in a row. Those are the people who have the strongest materials in place right now because they've been able to spend a year getting it in place and they've been able to do a little bit over a year consistently rather than having to drop everything to start planning and figure this out. So you're either going to be spending time or you're going to be spending money in order to come up with a good plan. There's a lot of several no cost. They're not free because they are paid oftentimes through grants, but they're technical assistance providers who help go through the planning process with you. Very little financial investment. Sometimes they do have a little bit because it makes people have more skin in the game, but very often it's little to no financial investment. And they guide you through the process. So their expertise, they give you a lot of feedback. You do the actual writing, you do the actual like work to figure the specifics out, but then they help you and connect you with a lot. There's also a lot of private consultancy services that do a lot of the work for you. They can be extremely high in their cost, and oftentimes they'll do the writing and the work, and it's informed by your experience and about your specific situation, but they kind of take that burden off of you. So either you're spending a lot of money to have somebody do it for you, or you're spending a lot of time being guided by experts who have you do it, but they kind of make sure that you're on the right track the whole time. And so you're going to be spending one or the other. And so for most people, it's a lot more realistic to spend time over a long period rather than spending a lot of money over a short period. Writing things down does make everything easier. Usually there are lots of gaps. This is why I also like the spending time over a long time, because when you try to spend a lot of money and have somebody do it for you, somebody like me, so I'm convincing you why you shouldn't hire somebody like me right now. But when you hire somebody to do something on a short term, it's more likely that there will be things that maybe aren't noticed compared to if you are working over a year, there's more opportunity for unrealized things to come up. Owner time is very rarely tracked or recorded. Staff are doing things in different ways, and it's hard to share with third parties for review. Usually writing things down, you get a look at the hidden costs. You can find the most sustainable business model. Really helps out with things like succession planning and planning out your growth for the business. Materials are really easily reused when you have them in a business plan. It's always the hardest to get going to do your first one. The financial records are oftentimes really weak. You're unfamiliar with grant language or like kind of the business language. But after you use it the first time, they're well documented. You know what your market is. you can reuse a lot of things from your business plan in a grant application. It also really pays to grow off your local network. So if you're working with no-cost technical assistance providers over the year, it puts you top of mind for new opportunities. You usually have stronger relationships because you're able to engage with them over time. And people in these positions really become your advocates. It also helps that you're able to engage with people who offer the grants. They have initiatives throughout the year, and you're able to engage new audiences, learn about gaps in your current operation, and it just exposes you to a lot more. I think that builds onto and creates a foundation, which then lead you to be able to take advantage of a lot of other funding opportunities that are out there. The MPEP is not stated to be repeated currently, but there has been an overwhelming response to the opportunities. There's been a lot of demand, and there's been a lot of advocacy for local food systems right now. There's been a lot of funding recently. And so I think that it's definitely worth developing these materials because the potential right now is the highest that there will be more opportunities, even though they're not stated right now. The potential is high that there could be more. And after your plan is developed, there are a number of state level programs, the loan and guarantees, other things which can be used to fuel growth. And if you come up with a plan for expansion, many times you'll see that it would also be profitable, even if you got it through a loan or something like that. And so going through that planning process can make it feasible even without a grant. Grant's always nice, of course, but it should be feasible even without a grant in order to be really competitive. There also are a large number of grants from federal agencies, USDA, NRCS. There's state agencies, there's city and county governments, there's private organizations. Navigating all this is pretty difficult. That's why we have developed lists that we have, and we also do send out periodic updates. So every week we send out a newsletter that has new funding opportunities that we've identified for a wide range of agricultural organizations. There are some specific to meat processors. If you're also a producer, there are a lot for those, technical service providers and the like. Grants don't cover everything, but usually you can use grants to strategically offset costs. And so if you're bringing money into your business, you're able to invest in growth overall, even if you can't find a grant that covers specifically what you want to do. Stewards Unlimited, we help ag organizations grow with confidence. We've seen a lot of success, and we focus on supporting people by identifying and evaluating funding opportunities, designing competitive projects which help further your goals, and winning the funding through proposal development. We do project management for all of our processes, and so we kind of walk people through it step by step. And oftentimes we find ourselves acting as kind of a one-stop shop resource for other required services as well. So in order to apply for what you've been doing, you've already done the first step, which is seeking new information. That's the hardest part, taking time out from your day. I know it's very valuable to go and just listen to somebody talk at you for an hour. And so you've done the hardest step, getting new information. Next would be register on sam.gov. I would encourage you to check out my website. Feel free to reach out to me directly and have a conversation about your goals. I'm one of many who can probably at least point you in the right direction of what you're needing next. And I'm happy to do that and kind of help you find the next step. So with that, I'll just say thank you so much for your time. Feel free to reach out. This is my email, my phone. We also have Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we frequently post new grant opportunities, in addition to a newsletter that you can sign up for on our website. Or if you scan this nifty QR code, you can sign up to be contacted directly. And I'm happy to have a one-on-one consultation call with anybody and just kind of share what resources I have, learn a little bit more about your operation, and point you in the right direction, at least as far as I can tell. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sydney, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Stephen. I know this was really helpful. With that, we'll give people a few minutes for questions if they have them. Otherwise, we will wrap things up. So if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the Q&A right now, we'll hang around for a minute or two. But if not, we appreciate you spending your afternoon with us, and reach out with any questions. We'll give it like one more minute here, 30 seconds.
Yeah, and again, feel free, if there's any follow-up questions, via email or anything, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to chat, um, help out in any way that I can.
All right. I think we'll wrap things up with that. Feel free to reach out. Thank you guys.
Thank you.